We got another one of them. Popping at the mouth or the side of his neck when he pouts. No argument, no rebuttal from. He ain't from my town, I don't know him, so I'm guessing he's a clown.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. So Dark Side of the Ring has finally stumbled upon something I don't know anything about, which is the Grizzly Smith family of Jake the Snake Roberts, Sam Houston, and Rockin' Robin. This was eye-opening. Now, I can't say I didn't know anything about it, because I did see a lot of this stuff was addressed in Jake Roberts' Pick Your Poison documentary, where he talked about a lot of this stuff, a lot of the abuse and everything. But it was interesting hearing it from Robin and, Baby Doll also being there and hearing their story. So this was dark. This was dark. It was dark with a capital D. Talking about straight up pedophilia and child molestation. And this ain't no game, dog. Now, to put it all in a nutshell, Grizzly Smith, apparently, who is the father of Jake the Snake Roberts. So I should tell people who are a little bit younger, even though some of these, like Sam Houston being in the WWF, was a little before my time. I was probably about 3 or 4 years old. Same thing with Rockin' Robin. I was probably about 2 or 3 when she was there. But at one point, Grizzly Smith, who is an older wrestler from the Territory days, he is the father of Jake the Snake Roberts, Rockin' Robin, whose name is Robin Smith, and Michael Smith, who wrestled as Sam Houston. So if you ever watched the Territories, you've probably seen Sam Houston. Rockin' Robin only really worked in the WWF. Now, as far as I know, they didn't give a full breakdown of her career biography. And Jake Roberts, of course, we know was a Territory guy. So each one of them got to tell, their story a little bit. Sam Houston's story is a lot different than Robin's and Jake's. But Jake mentioned his real name on this episode, which is nobody ever calls him Aurelian Smith Jr. Nobody ever calls him that. And he talked about essentially when he sort of put that personality away, that he has become Jake Roberts. Almost like Mick Foley, except for this is for real. Like, Aurelian Smith went through such horrible stuff that he can't deal with being that person anymore, and that he prefers to be Jake. And that's a very interesting thing. I can't wait to get there. So essentially what happened is Grizzly Smith had a thing for underage girls. Jake's mom was 13 when he was conceived. So he was conceived to an underage girl. Then after Jake, there was Richard Neighbors. Richard Neighbors is the brother of Jake the Snake Roberts, Sam Houston, and Rockin' Robin, but he was given up for adoption. Then there was another girl named Jolene. I think it was the older daughter named Jolene. And Jolene. And then there was Sam Houston, Michael Smith. And then there was Robin Smith, Rockin' Robin. So Jake Roberts, his mom was 13. He also claimed that Robin's mom molested him. And that's been a consistent thing that I saw over time, because Robin's mom was his stepmother. So the way the story goes is that Jake, was being the oldest, stayed with Grizzly Smith and his mom for a long time. And then Grizzly left. Grizzly walked out on them. Jake then went to go live with his grandparents. And his brother was given up for adoption. Then you had, in Dark Side of the Ring, they oddly said that Jake had this idyllic home with his grandparents. But in the Pick Your Poison documentary, he talked about his grandfather being an alcoholic and pissing himself and vomiting all over himself. But I guess they wanted to stick to Grizzly Smith, and so therefore they didn't go into all of that. But in the Pick Your Poison documentary, Jake talked about his grandfather being an alcoholic too. And that basically he died of cirrhosis. And I'm not sure if these were his dad's parents or his mom's parents. I'm not entirely sure. But when his grandma died, he was 11 years old. He got to move back with Grizzly. And when he moved back in with Grizzly, was remarried to a lady named Martha. And Martha is the mother of Robin. So then he says that, he was there for a while, and Martha was 16. So Grizzly was a grown ass man who already had 4 or 5 kids, and he was shacking up with a teenage girl. And then Jake says that he went into a little bit more detail in the Pick Your Poison documentary of things that she wanted to do with him. Like, she would call him into the bathroom while she was bathing, have him bathe her and stuff like that. But in the Dark Side of the Ring, he basically just said that, there was some stuff going on, sex stuff. And that it happened a couple of times before he told his dad. And then when he tried to tell his dad, she caught him telling him. And then she beat him for telling him. And he said, basically, it was like, hey, I was punished. I was abused for telling people that I was abused. When the producer, now, another thing that should be noted is that these people do not have relationships with each other, right? They didn't grow up in the same house. Like, Jake Roberts and his brother, I believe Richard, grew up in the same house a little bit. But he really didn't have a relationship with Sam Houston or Rockin' Robin. But he said, the producers of Dark Side of the Ring brought it to Robin's attention that Jake was saying this stuff about her mom. And she was saying, like, she doesn't feel like her mom would do something like that. But if she did, it was probably something that her dad put them up to. And that, maybe, I don't know. See, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to go that far. But I'm just saying what she said, that, she feels like her dad probably pushed her mom into doing that. I don't think people need to be pushed. But who knows? We don't know. But Jake ends up getting into wrestling because his dad was abusive, verbally and physically. And he said his dad used to call him worthless and say that he was gutless and he was ashamed of him. And he got into wrestling to show his dad up. He wanted to channel his hate somewhere. So he says he always wanted his dad to be proud of him. Now, in the Pick Your Poison documentary, he talked about he wanted to be more successful than his dad. Like, that was his goal, is to be more successful than his dad was. And, that he was basically doing it out of spite. And he also talked about his dad calling promotions and getting him fired because he didn't want him in the business. So he would call promotions and get him fired. He would sick his friends on him so they could stretch him and beat his ass and try to run him out of the territories and all this kind of stuff. But he kept fighting and kept coming back. And so that was his story, that, that Grizzly Smith was horrible to him. And then Sam Houston's story is basically dad is Superman. I idolized my dad growing up. I never believed any of this stuff that people were saying about him. And he didn't even know about most of the stuff, about some of the about the molestation and stuff like that. He didn't even know about it. So he just went along in his life thinking his dad was the greatest dude ever lived. And he idolized. And when he had his problems as an adult with alcohol, his dad was always the one that bailed him out. So he was like, dad always bailed me out of jail, And he would say, like, oh, well, I didn't know if it was dad doing it, but, he got like 100, what did Jim Cornette say about, he broke the Texas record for DUIs or something like that. And, but Grizzly, being a big star, he knew a lot of the judges and magistrates and stuff like that. So he would be able to get Sam off, and he would keep getting busted. And then eventually he did get busted and there was nothing he could do. But that was pretty much Sam Houston. He didn't have like a story about being abused or anything like that. He was just kind of like oblivious to all of that stuff. And then there was Joe Lynn. Apparently Joe Lynn was also abused by Grizzly Smith, but she never got to say anything. She would counsel Robin to see if she was being abused. And then Joe Lynn, when she was only 20, was kidnapped and apparently killed by the ex-wife of her current husband. So Joe Lynn was 20 years old. She had a baby with a guy. I don't know what his name was. They didn't mention what his name was. But that guy's ex-wife used to send threatening letters to Joe Lynn. And then one day, Joe Lynn disappeared. And they never found her body. But the lady who had been sending her letters admitted that she had been kidnapped. and that she had kidnapped her, but claims that the girl had escaped. But Richard Neighbors, who was the brother of Jake Roberts and all these people, he basically says that if you knew Jolene, you knew her size, she was about 5'10", about 200 pounds, she wouldn't have been easily moved by another woman. So he thinks that somebody helped her. And, it was pretty much, it was insinuated, heavily insinuated, that Grizzly Smith maybe had aided in the disappearance of his own daughter. And, Richard talked about, not seeing his dad cry, that he didn't see the emotion that you would think he would have seen out of a father whose daughter was kidnapped and apparently murdered. And, there was this, it was real dark. This shit was stunningly dark. But it was Robin who pretty much said that she feels like, hey, dad had a lot to lose if she was going to go public with all of these, all these allegations of being molested and everything. But of course, none of that stuff could be proved. They even had the sheriff or the chief of police from Tatum, Texas. He was in this episode basically saying why, they never found the body. And they said, well, Faye Lynn Rogers, the lady who was arrested, she worked near an incinerator. So it was likely that she dumped the body in the incinerator, but they never found it. So they can't charge her with murder because they never found the body. But she was charged with kidnapping. She got served with 30 years. She only served 7. And, that's pretty much it. So if she did murder Jolene Smith, she got away with it. She didn't get away with kidnapping her. She admitted to that, but she essentially got away with a murder. So that's incredibly dark. That's horribly dark. So Robin, her story was that, when she was about 8 or 9 years old, her dad started molesting her, and that it began with him ignoring her, pretending that she didn't exist. And it got her to feel real bad about herself. And then he love bombed her after that. And, basically he would ignore her for like a week or so. And then when she started feeling like really bad that he wasn't giving her any attention, he started giving her an abundance of attention. And then he took it from there to, using his position to touch and do different things to her. And she said for 6 years, from when she was 8 to when she was 14, she was being molested by her dad. And then her mom eventually found out and took her away. So then Robin, when she grew up, she wanted to get into the wrestling business. So she went to go train in, I think, South Carolina or something like that. And then from there, she used her dad, actually, to get into the WWF, which is very interesting. Because, Jake was saying, like, his dad did not want him in the wrestling business, even though all 3 of them ended up getting into the wrestling business. But here is Grizzly getting Robin into the WWF. He got her a dark match. And Robin worked with Sherry. And Vince was so impressed, he signed her to the contract. And, she ended up becoming the women's champion. And she was the women's champion for 2 years before they deactivated the division. They didn't go into any of that. They didn't go into any of that stuff. Because it wasn't about her career. But, she had a really good run. She had a 2-year run as the champion, even though she was probably inactive for most of that run, if we're being honest, I think. But Sam Houston was in WWF at the same time. It didn't work out, of course. And Jake Roberts was there at the same time. And, of course, we know what happens to Jake Roberts. So that was essentially the backbone of the show, as them talking about how, how horrible their lives was. And all 3 of them struggle with addiction. For Jake, it was cocaine and pills and alcohol. For Sam Houston, it was alcohol. And for Robin, it was alcohol. And, Sam Houston didn't really have an excuse because he hadn't been abused. So he was just, he just liked the taste of the drink. And, Rockin' Robin was basically like, I had these childhood memories of being abused, and, alcohol was helping with that. So you had that, and that was real interesting. Now, one of the more interesting things is Baby Doll. You probably have seen, never. She's a manager from the territory days. She was married to Sam Houston. And she says that she used to ride in the car with Grizzly Smith. and she would see Grizzly pick up teenage girls from their own parents' homes and take them on the road. And sometimes they would pull over so that he could kiss on them and stuff like that. Or, well, that's what Robin said, that, sometimes he would pull over with a teenage girl and, kiss on her and stuff like that. Now, Baby Doll actually said that he would pick up these girls, but she never actually saw him do anything to them, you know? And it's an interesting story near the end where Robin talks about, her dad coming to see her, and it was just like a random appearance. And he had a 9-year-old girl with him. And he wanted Robin to make the girl daiquiris. Like, she wanted to try a daiquiri. And Robin, of course, didn't make the daiquiri. But once Grizzly had went to sleep, she started asking the girl if he had been doing things to her. And the girl said, yeah, little things here and there, kissing and stuff like that. And so the next day, she basically took the kid away from him. So this was incredibly dark. This was horribly dark. And it was some of the most depressing shit in the world. I think that, oh God. I don't know a lot about Grizzly Smith. I know that he was the booker for Mid-South for a long time. He was already, like, I had never watched as much wrestling to go back that far. But a lot of the things I heard about him were pretty negative from the beginning. But that's just me being a guy who grew up in the 90s where he was already done wrestling. And most of these stories that I've heard about him came from Jake Roberts or from people who, he was in the office, he was a booker. So people maybe spread rumors about him, which Cornette talked about, hey, guys will always make these jokes about him being with underage girls and all that kind of stuff. And you never really know what's the truth and what's guys just getting even with somebody in the office. People will say all sorts of things about people who work in the office if you have a problem with them. Especially if they have sexual proclivities that are pretty well known. I mean, one of the best options that you could talk about is Pat Patterson, right? There's people who constantly say, oh, Pat Patterson had a crush on Shawn Michaels, so, he would get more opportunities and stuff like that. It's like just because the guy works in the office and he's gay, all of a sudden the guy got pushed because he has crushes on him. And so when people say stuff about Grizzly Smith, you have to realize he worked in the office. But when his kids are saying it, that's different. When his daughter is like, oh, he molested me. When Jake is like, his wife was a molester, and it can be proven that my mom was 13 when I was born. Like that kind of stuff, you can't ignore that. Like, that's not ignorable. This is horrifying. I see why they drink so much and why they snorted coke and pretty much threw their own lives away. You can feel it. It was a sadness. And the saddest thing about it all is that they're not close, and they're adults and they're still not close. They knew they were related. I remember seeing in books and things like that they would ask Vince not to ever mention that they were related when they were in the WWF together. They never wanted to be recognized as being related. Like, that's crazy. You can imagine having your own brother and sister on the roster and you pretending they're not there? You don't want anybody to know? And it's still like that. They still don't really talk. They still don't really hang out. And, and each one of them says that they would like to be closer. They just don't know how to, What do you say? I mean, if you're Jake, how do you look Robin in the face? Like, he says, like, oh, it would be great to have a sister. But you're saying that her mom molested you. Like, that's a big hurdle to get over. Like, Sam is a little bit easier. Richard was adopted, so he was safe from all the abuse. He didn't know a lot of this stuff was going on. So it's different for him. He's just kind of like, hey, I got brothers and sisters. That's cool. But they grew apart. It's tough. It's been 30 some odd years or something like that, man. It's tough to get over that hill. And I was really hoping that episode would end with all of them in the same room. Kind of like the Pillman episode or the Benoit episode or something, where it ends on a good note. And it didn't. It didn't even end on a good note. It just ended with, hey, if you're dealing with sexual abuse, here's what you should do. And I was, hoping that they were all be in the same room, hugging and shaking hands and trying to catch up, even if it was phony just for the camera. That's what I thought the show was going to end on, but it didn't. And that was sad as fuck. This was a very depressing episode of Dark Side of the Ring. But this is the kind of shit Dark Side of the Ring should be covering. This is it, This is the kind of shit that we should be covering in here. Not stuff people supposedly said about somebody, but something that could be proven. It can be proven that Jake, even if you could say, oh, well, the rest of that stuff is bullshit, they can prove whether Jake's mom was under the age of 18 when he was born or not. Like that's solid fucking evidence that the guy's a fucking pedophile. So that's sick. That's some sick shit. But it was powerful. So thank you guys for listening. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, donate to the channel if you can. Talk to you guys later, man. Peace.